Okay. Thank you very much for your introduction. Thank you for the invitation. My presentation will be much more applied than the one that I listened before, the very interesting presentation by the colleague. And this is practically, I'm trying to share my screen now. I guess the screen has been seen. Can somebody verify that the screen is there? You can see my screen?
The screen is okay. It's okay.
Okay. So I will try mostly to answer a question in the chat by Dr. Kalogerinos, who asked the previous speaker whether it is worthwhile to live in cities. And I will try to exemplify this by providing a number of risks for cities and as well as challenges ahead. Of course, this is a presentation which has to be restricted time-wise, so the most important aspects will be presented, at least with respect to my understanding. So the critical issue is how to approach a city. And this is very important because usually cities are being considered just as an urban agglomeration of buildings, which is absolutely incorrect in the sense that the city has to be taken into consideration as a living organism. There's exchange of momentum, exchange of traditions, cultures. There is a planning process which is going on. Everything has to be intercorrelated. It's not just buildings, as usually is the case in many approaches. So cities are changing, and we all know this. They are changing in population density, which is more important in their extent. The urban expansion of the cities is very important. It has been seen in many cities around the world. In urban density, in the energy and the emission sources, which is something that is of considerable attention, taken the impact of cities to climate change, in land use, land cover, in the presence of green and blue areas, and in urban climate. Urban climate is what we understand, the temperature field, the humidity, the wind at the surface, and the thermal environment. So all of these reflect a system of different changes that may occur in a city and which influence the state of the urban climate. What is important also to know is that things are getting into the wrong direction. You can see in this graph there are two curves. The one that is solid, the black one, let's say, shows the expansion of the cities worldwide, population-wise, in millions. And there's a strong deviation from now on, with respect to the population in the rural areas, which means that there's a solid urbanization of the cities, of the areas, meaning more people are getting to the cities. And this is a projection which needs to be taken on board. If we also consider that cities contribute by 70% already in the emission of greenhouse gases, which, as we all know, influence the state of the climate. So I will go through some examples with respect to the main the main measures to be taken in a city for adaptation to climate change by exemplifying to the city of Athens. The first point is urbanization and urban sprawl. And I will show you some depictions that we have developed. This is the overall agglomeration of the city of Athens. What you see in red is the main urban areas of the cities. In pink, they are the suburbs of the cities. In green, of course, it's the greenery, and in yellow, the bare soil. And this is an interesting slide because it goes back to 1993, practically 30 years ago. And a similar depiction as developed for the city of Athens for a period 24 years later is the following. And you can see that the city, I will go back and forth, and you can see that the city expands to the north, expands to the west, to the area of Lefsina, to the eastern part of the city, where it's the airport of Athens, which you can see it to the right part of the slide. The expansion of the city is controlled, and this is because once the airport was constructed, there were a lot of expropriations that took place that saved the area from being constructed. And this is a major achievement of the time, because in this case, the city didn't expand that much towards the airport, which is the usual trend. What is important to note also that the expansion of the city to the west and to the north is been following the construction of major highway, the Attikiodos, which imposes a very important concept for the cities, whether a construction project can modify the spatial planning of the city. And you can see to the north, I don't know if the cursor is obvious, you can see that the areas are along to the Attikiodos, the highway that goes around the city. So this is an expansion which is mostly with respect to buildings and constructions, but is it enough? the city, as I said before, has to be dealt as a living organism. So we have to see what is the population change in the city. And this is a comparison between the population change in 1991 and 2011. As you know, the last census was just completed and the results are just out. So we don't have the recent data, but what somebody can see is the impact to the urban expansion of the city in the different neighborhoods, in the different districts of the cities, especially the ones to the north and to the east. Practically all different municipalities gain population at the expense of the municipality of Athens, the municipality of Moschato, and the municipality of Piraeus, which is practically a difficult thing to happen in a city, that is to lose population from its central part, because the central part is the historic center of the city of Athens, among other areas, and it's very important to gather a population in those areas instead of the population moving around. So this is a very important finding, which also controls the adaptation plans to climate change, because this slide reflects the new population dispersion of the city and the new population density. The second step that has to be taken on board is to assess the thermal environment of the city and practically go one step further and detect the thermal spots. This is an environmental application, but with strong social dimension, because you recognize which parts of the city are hotter than the others at a constant rate, and meaning that in those particular areas, the vulnerability of the population is higher. So is this the case only for Athens? No. We did a study for the Mediterranean cities, and you can see them at the bottom of the slide. And this is a comparison that took place for many years, let's say in the 21st century. And what we have depicted is the change in degrees centigrade per decade. And all cities have been demonstrating an increase. Some cities, for instance, Cairo, a higher increase. Athens is here. It has an increase of something like 0.5 degrees per decade. So it's not per year, it's per decade, which means that we have overall an increase of roughly 1 degree. And if we believe that 1 degree is a small number, and maybe it's a small number once we think how the temperature changes every day, when you speak about the climate, which is the steady state for a number of periods, for several decades, it's a high number. So there's a trend for thermal expand, for thermal burden in the Mediterranean cities, and this is related definitely to the way cities are being developed and also to the impact of climate change. The second point is to see how the temperature is being modified from morning to night. And this is important because it reflects the capacity of the city to cool down during the nighttime, and it depends on the quality of the buildings. So in the top slide, we can see the surface temperature in the different parts of the city and the overall agglomeration of Athens in the daytime, and the nighttime, the temperatures are higher in the city, meaning that the city keeps the temperature and it's not getting really cold during the nighttime. Again, this is a matter of sources of heat and also the quality of buildings, which keep the temperature, the heat, and they do not release the heat to the outer environment. This is the most important slide to my understanding, which is the recognition of hotspots. Again, this is just the city of Athens, the municipality of Athens I meant. You can see here is the Acropolis and the stadium, the Panathinaikos Stadium. And what we have depicted are areas to the west part of the city, which are consistently higher temperature compared to other parts of the city. And these are recognized as hotspots, which means that these are the areas where the local administration, the city administration, has to step in and take measures at first priority because the population there is more vulnerable. They are exposed into more adverse thermal conditions. The next item for a city is the role of urban greenery. And this is a very difficult question because we all know that cities do not have spare spaces in order to develop greenery. So you have to find ways in order to accommodate the best solutions in difficult situations. The overall depiction of the agglomeration of the city of Athens with all the municipalities has been depicted in this slide. And what does this slide show? To the left part shows the temperature on the ground with different colors. The more bluish, the lower the temperatures, the more red, the higher the temperatures. And to the right is the distribution of greenery in the different parts of the same area. NDVI is the normalized difference of the vegetation index. It practically reflects the vegetation in the different areas. What somebody can see, which is straightforward as a matter of fact, is that higher the vegetation density in a place, the lower the temperature. So in this way, somebody can depict the differences between different parts of the city. If I was to make a differentiation, I would say that the city has an axis which starts from the northeast and goes to the southwest, which goes through the city of Athens and practically separates the cities in two parts. The one part has more vegetation and less temperatures, and the other part has less vegetation and higher temperatures. So there's a differentiation between different parts of the city depending on the presence of vegetation, if we speak just with respect to this parameter. Then we did another application to see whether the size of a park, the size of the urban area is important with respect to greenery, with respect to the specific parameter, which is called the surface park cooling intensity. That is the capacity, the potential of a park to provide some cooling to the neighboring area. And we have found out, we have put together a number of parks in different parts of the city. You can see them here. They are recognizable, the majority of these at least. So this data come from July and August. And what we see is something that we expect, that the higher the size of the park, which is the x-axis, the horizontal axis, the higher the cooling intensity of the park. That means that if you have a park in an area, you have a cooling result to the neighborhood, to the neighboring buildings of the neighboring areas. But if we include in this slide additional areas, urban greenery ones, which have higher size, for instance, in this case, the addition of the park, the Trichis Park or other areas, we can see that the curve becomes practically asymptotic, meaning that after a specific number, for instance, roughly 14 hectares, the cooling intensity becomes practically not exactly the same, but it slows down, it gets practically the same. And this is a very important finding, and it has been found also in other cities, Shanghai, Barcelona, and others, meaning that it's more important to have in a city small and medium-sized parks instead of large parks. That doesn't mean that a large park doesn't have a value. It's of course very important to have large parks too, in order to keep the areas free from constructions, in order to provide areas for the citizens. But if you want to tackle the urban microclimate, and especially the pressures with respect to the thermal environment, it's very important to disperse the parks in the city at a size which is compatible to the specific characteristics of the city. We call this urban acupuncture, that is to place in different parts of the city, small and medium-sized parks, similar to what the city of Athens has been doing these days with the pocket parks, although the pocket parks are very small and their cooling intensity is rather small. But still, the concept is pretty much the same. The next part, which is very important, and this is something which is a new development in the area of urban science as far as the climate change issue is concerned, is that the city doesn't have the same climate in all places, and especially if the city is a big one, expanded city. And this is the analysis that we did, and this is what we call the local climate zones. This is international methodology, typology prepared by a couple of scientists from abroad, Stewart and Oke. And this practically takes into consideration a number of different characteristics, different parameters, for instance, the building height, the building density, the material on the ground, the percentage of greenery, the sky view factor of a specific area, whether the area has an open air or whether it's been trapped within buildings. And in each of these cases, there is a categorization. So you can see that different parts of the city belong to a different climate zone. So why this is important? It is important because you cannot apply the same adaptation plan for climate change in cities in every single zone without taking into consideration the differentiations. In other words, you need a different adaptation plan to the north, where the bluish color is central, and a different adaptation plan in the city of Athens, in the municipality of Athens, where the colors are red and orange, meaning that you have to differentiate in space. And this is very important because as I started this presentation, the case is that the city has different characteristics dispersed in different parts of the city. It's not just buildings, it's a synthesis of different parameters. And what about the future of the cities and the future climate change, which is an issue of very much importance, I guess, practically everywhere. These are the projected near surface temperatures in the city of Athens using a number of models that we use in my laboratory. for the period from 2020 to 2070, which is depicted in the x-axis of this slide. And this is the annual change of temperature. And this is for the summer months. There's a trend which is steady. There's, of course, a deviation. You can see that with the gray zone, which is the error that is being reflected in the uncertainty, as a matter of fact, in climate models. But the tendency is there. The city will be experiencing higher temperatures in the future. And of course, in addition to this, it will be experienced, and this is more important, more heat waves of higher duration, higher frequency, and higher intensity. So the challenge is there, and the cities have to develop clever solutions that will cope with the new challenge, and they will have to introduce these solutions in their planning. And this is very important because cities, administration-wise, are very slow in changing the practices. But now the time goes faster than the changes in the practices, and this is something to be dealt. So to conclude, climate change has been impacting the cities. The cities are also controlling, in a sense, the rate of climate change because of the number of emissions of greenhouse gases from the cities. 70% come from the cities. So there is an interaction. It's a twofold approach. What is important, and this is the message I would like to share with you, is that we need to adapt the cities to climate change. We need to develop adaptation plans, but there's no adaptation plan that can fit to all cases. There's a need to differentiate on the basis of scientific and environmental findings in order to have the best results. As a matter of fact, adaptation plans cost considerably, and what they do is they impose a new how should I say, a new structure in the city. So they have to be to the right direction in order to develop what is to be developed with respect to climate change and the adaptation to climate change. This practically concludes my presentation. Thanks again for your attention and for the invitation to this very important event.